Thank you, Lindsay. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of approving the consent agenda as proposed, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Good, the consent agenda is approved. Moving on to recognition, item 7, Dr. Linscomb.
Yes, we want to recognize some folks, some of our own folks that have done some great things, and we know we have rock stars and different folks, but it's great to see when some outside folks recognize that as well. So I believe starting us out, Ryan's going to introduce someone in our first recognition. So Ryan.
Good evening.
Evening.
Well, the communications team is here tonight to congratulate Miss Mallory McGowan on being chosen by INSPRA, which is the National School Public Relations Association. All of us school PR peeps that do this across the country. She was chosen as a member of their 2018-2019 class of 35 under 35. According to INSPRA, this group of emerging leaders is proving that strategic communication is tireless, extending easily to our next generation of school public relations professionals. So as you guys know, I've only been here for 4 months. It's not long that I've had the opportunity to work alongside Mallory, but certainly her passion for JCPS and her dedication to her career going on 8 years here for public relations is evident in her daily work. So Amy, who's been here longer, has some additional thoughts to share. Yes.
Right, just a little bit. I had the privilege and honor of nominating Miss Mal, considering I was well over the 35 threshold, right, at that point in time. So, and during the time, I'll just share a little bit about the nomination that landed Mallory this awesome recognition that she deserves. I went into the nomination and saying during the time I've known her, she's been very active in our community, serving on various committees throughout the community, which I think also has helped prepare her and make her successful in her job, and then also help us as a district really have a spot on the map with our community relations. So I appreciate working with her for a lot of those areas. And then most notably, no surprise, I also had to include how she was very integral in aiding us in passing our April 2017 bond levy. 2017 seems like a long time ago until we blink and it feels like yesterday, right? Maybe we've slept since then. And this huge win was due in large part, and we think the game changer that we've all talked about was with her success in reaching and involving thousands of stakeholders, thousands, via social media, broadcast, and printed media. And that's definitely her bailiwick, and she did just that, and that changed the tune for this campaign. I talked a little bit about community, so I want to share something from our friend Ann Bax. I talked about community, and I asked Ann to give us a little bit of feedback about her relationship and working with Mallory, and here's what she said. Mallory has an evident and immense passion for JCPS and her community. Mallory was integral in helping lead the JCPS United Way campaign for JCPS, which resulted in a $14,000 increase that will help thousands in our community. Her compassion and dedication to JCPS, the United Way, and the Mid-Missouri community is truly remarkable and inspiring. Mallory epitomizes the heart of giving, advocating, and volunteering, and understands her impactful role in that all our community is, and that we are best when we are stronger together. So thank you, Ann. And I appreciate everything Mallory does, what we've done together as a team since I joined the district, and look forward to what's to come. So thanks for allowing us the time to recognize her.
Okay. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Tall man in the back.
Make a difference. There we go. That's right.
Sorry. Okay, next, we want to recognize Kelsey Chrisman through the Healthy Schools, Healthy Communities Engagement Expert, I believe is what she was recognized for. Kelsey, I won't ask you to stand up now, but Kelsey, you can wave here, but I'll have you come up here in a second. I won't make you stand up here, dance, anything first, but she is our Healthy Schools Coordinator for a school district, and whether walking school buses, cooking clubs, school gardens, running programs, she has just hit the ground running and has done an outstanding job engaging our folks And from a wellness standpoint with our schools and our community, has been great. And I've just had a little bit of part of that participating myself, but she's done so many things in our schools, and we're just so excited for what she's done and being recognized. So I was on a panel, herself and Justin, which I'll introduce here in a second, a panel when they were talking about schools and communities working together for healthy schools and healthy communities. So I was blessed and fortunate to be a part of that, and they had been recognized, and what an honor that was for us. So first I would like Kelsey, if you would come forward, and then we'd like to just recognize you as the engagement expert, and it's great to know that those outside our wings have recognized that. So congratulations to that. There we go. Okay, thank you. Okay, next, and I'll just do it from here. The Courageous Champion, Justin Reynolds. He is a PE teacher at Callaway Hills and has done some outstanding job out there. He was recognized as the Courageous Champion, working with Kelsey, working with Mr. Stalls, our principal out there, and doing some great things at Callaway Hills. They just, I've heard so many great things, what they've done for their community, their neighborhood there with their students, and we're just so excited that they recognized him. A little blurb here they wrote, the Courageous Champion Award recognizes an individual who goes above and beyond in their school, whether starting a new program, serving as a role model for their students or other staff, always being there to jump in and help out, but play an integral role building a healthy future for their students. This year's Courageous Champion Award goes to Justin Reynolds from Callaway Hills Elementary School. So Justin, if you come forward. Thank you very much. There we go. Thank you, Justin. Mr. James, I believe you are introducing our next recognition here, Rihanna McKee.
Good evening. I'm representing the students and staff of Jefferson City High School and congratulating and recognizing one of our great staff members who's accomplished so many things since I've been here and prior to my coming here, but currently she's being recognized by the Missouri Association of Student Councils as the Advisor of the Year for the Northeast District. Many of her students would say, and I definitely don't want to get this wrong, they would say of her that she proves every day that true leaders inspire greatness in others. And I couldn't and we couldn't agree more. Not only is she outstanding in her role as the Student Council Advisor, she's outstanding in our classrooms, and just like her students would point out, she is absolutely great in her influence over our students and growing them as leaders. So we would absolutely agree in her nomination and her winning the Northeast Advisor of the Year, and we look forward to her competing on the state level also. So if you wouldn't mind joining me in recognizing and congratulating our very own Miss Rihanna McKee.
Gary, are you introducing Bob is? You turn and come right on back.
Good evening again. So I have the honor of recognizing our first difference maker here in the district. And while there are some written notes there about how he became to be one of our difference makers for the month, I'm going to just off the cuff tell you why I think that he has. Most people in their comments would say that Mr. Adams has just made the transition to being fully under construction this year as easy as possible. As we sat down last spring and started talking about what our goals might be for this year, what Mr. Adams said was absolutely the last thing, or the last, yeah, I guess last thing is right, that he wanted to be a difference maker was the construction. So it was, he started preparing for that battle very early on, and I think his being recognized this evening is an indication that he's won that battle, that not only is he a difference maker, he has not allowed the construction to make a difference in what we do every day. Our students are still learning, our teachers are still teaching, and he's done a great job of being responsive in that area for our students and our staff. So if you wouldn't mind joining me in congratulating Mr. Jacob Adams as a
Never ages.
Scott, can you come up and introduce our next difference maker?
So our second person we're recognizing this evening was based on a letter from a parent, but I can tell you that I could have easily gotten 24 of the same letters because that's just what we have in her. So it says, I just wanted to tell you that I had my parent-teacher conference with my son's teacher, Mrs. Bax, this past week. I wanted to express how thoroughly impressed I am by her teaching style and passion she shows for my son. That was probably one of the best parent-teacher conferences I've ever had, and I've been to a lot of them. She was very patient with our questions, didn't rush us, answered everything we asked about, and we could clearly see that she truly cares about her students. It's been a long time since I've come across a teacher, if ever, with as much drive and desire as Mrs. Bax has for not only teaching my son, but all of her students. I was really awestruck with the relationship she has developed with my son. We all know no child is perfect, mine included. However, the way she explained it to me, they have a sort of bond where they make each other laugh and joke all in the name of education. She can also get her point across to him without diminishing his spirit, making him feel angry, upset, etc. when he isn't following the rules. She is certainly great at reading my son and realizing what he needs to succeed, not only academically, but emotionally when he gets frustrated or agitated. I'm beginning to realize this is almost, if not as equally as important as the academics she teaches him as well. So after the magnificent conference with her, I wanted to pass along a note to you that maybe you can even forward on to your supervisors. What a brilliant teacher I think she is, and how fortunate my son is to have her this year. I couldn't be more pleased with his education so far, and I'm very excited to see what the rest of the year has in store. I think we are all too quick to complain about issues we don't like, but rarely take the time to tell someone when they are doing a superb job. Thank you, Katie Bax, for making a difference in my son's life and in the lives of all your fourth graders at Pioneer Trail.
Thank you.
This is just your second year with us.
Thank you.
Pioneer Trails. Good job, Katie.
Great.
Our last difference maker tonight is Katie Epema, and she was recognized and nominated for this recognition by the communications office because they were so impressed with her in her role as Parents as Teachers coordinator in our district that she wanted to reach out and make that program more accessible on Facebook and Twitter. So she reached out to them to see if they could create a site for them to share the mission and vision of what Parents as Teachers is all about. And not only through that and through her work in Jefferson City, she's realized the needs of some of our low-income families in regards to resources needed, including down to diapers and how that makes a major effect on a baby's health and medical expenses and on maternal depression. And so not only with diaper drives, but resource drives, she is striving to make the parents in this community have everything that they need and to have better education as to how they can take care of their kids. I got to witness this myself, attending a Parents as Teachers evening event several weeks ago, and not only Katie, but several others there were educating parents, providing daycare, but really talking to them about conscious discipline and how they can react when a kid does something to misbehave, but to not always go to the wrong response, but teaching them patience and some definite responses that they can use with their kids in a loving way. And so I am very pleased to recognize Katie Epema as a difference maker, and I appreciate all she's doing with the Parents as Teachers program.
thing I might just touch on, we have district difference makers across the district, and I just want to thank those who were recognized and thank those that took the time to recognize. It's easier to point out all the things we can get better at, which we all know we have many things, including myself, but it's also great to recognize folks that are making a difference. So congratulations to all who've been recognized.
Thank you. Truth. Thank you. Moving on to item 9, reports and communications. First up, we have superintendent update from Dr. Linscomb.
Absolutely, just a couple of things. One thing, we have some artwork here. We have behind us here in front of our crowd here is from Callaway Hills, some of their artwork from their students. So kudos to them. And then Bel Air in the back or the board in front of you there around the J.C. Reed. So it's always great to see some of our artwork from our students. So kudos to Callaway Hills and Bel Air for their artwork. I want to point that out. A couple things just to touch on. The ABLE tutoring. We have more than doubled the number of tutors that we have this year, working with our 6th graders primarily. We have 89 ABLE tutors, I believe. Last year we were in the upper 30s, 40. We're at 89. I'm doing it myself actually, and I just want to experience that. And so we meet with our individual students once a week, and it's just been a great thing as far as reading with our students. And hopefully we'll have some data to see some improvements and see if we're making a difference with our students across the district. So that's been a great thing. I want to touch on that. Had on the 23rd of October, the MoDOT meeting with Callaway County. We've had our Cole County with MoDOT, and when we look at our, when we have inclement weather, as we did today, just making sure we are working stronger together as a community, and we had a good meeting there. We do have, you might notice, our J.C. Reeds. That was on our opening session. Picture there, the far one there on the left, you can see from the previous 3 years, you see a common thing, that we are stronger together, and that's something we want to keep going. That's not just a, there's truth in it, and so we're trying to make that a reality. But excited to see the picture and the green that kind of just jumps out at you in the color there. So we're excited about that. We had active shooter training here in this office on the 26th of October. We had a couple individuals, officers from JCPD that came in, and it was a great training. It was real. Thanks to Frank for coordinating that, and our folks here experienced it firsthand, and hopefully we'll never have to worry about that. But it's also great to be proactive and you know, the old saying of you know, plan for the worst but hope for the best, and so planning for in those situations. So thank you, Frank, for coordinating that. On the 31st, on Halloween, I participated with the Food Bank of Central Missouri, packing over 400 buddy packs. Our Food Bank of Central Missouri, they give more than 1,250 backpacks per week. So that's over 1,000. So it takes a tremendous number of volunteers to help coordinate that and facilitate that. JCAC has done a great job with their students. They come and pack on a regular basis as well, and so our students are giving back, and that's just been a great thing. So there's a need for those that are less fortunate than some, and just what a great thing. So kudos to them. And United Way, we touched on earlier, they are a big part of make contributions to the food bank. So that was a great thing. Operation Bugle Boy had their dinner last week, and they worked to get students and community members to recognize the difference that our veterans, the men and women that have served our country, and so that's been a great thing, and was able to serve there and be a part of that. And just was going to touch on here lastly, as far as with our snow day or inclement weather procedures. So today we had an early out. Hopefully we won't have any inclement weather here overnight. As far as with tomorrow, as far as a late start or whatever, but there's a lot of factors. But at the end of the day, we want to ensure student safety and our staff getting to and from school. I've given the comment, we do live in Missouri, and a little snow shouldn't hurt us, but there are some that think any little snow that maybe we shouldn't have school. But it's a fine line with that, and but we try to caution on the side of being safe. We have a little different mindset here from Northwest Missouri to Central Missouri. It takes a little more or a little less snow here for inclement weather on how we all define that. So it's a very subjective term. But at the end of the day, we want to ensure student safety. So we did have today, we let out of school 2 hours early. And so trying to be on the side of safety, but also ensuring we have positive learning environments, and our kids need to be at school to ensure that they are learning. So that's all I have at this time as far as my report.
Any questions for Larry? Follow up? Good.
Okay.
Good report. Thanks, Larry.
Thank you.
Moving on to Chief of Learning update from Dr. Schindorf. Dr. Schindorf couldn't be with us this evening. He's unavailable, so I understand Gary Verslois is stepping into the batter's box for us.
Your eyes are not deceiving you, just a taller, better-looking version of Dr. Schindler. And the icing on the cake will be if he's watching live stream.
You'll know.
Be careful what I ask for, right, Kim? Okay. Just a few topics. One of the things that we've been doing a lot lately is talking about 9 through 12 programming and what that's going to look like with a second high school, Capital City High School. Some of the things we're talking about are course offerings, the sequence, and integrated courses. What's the future? Where do we go from here? But at the end of the day, how can we be effective and efficient and have high expectations for all of our students? What makes the most sense based on students, not on adult behaviors or adult interests? And I think if we keep going in the direction we're going, I think you're going to see a lot of that needle move in the right direction. I'm really proud of the 9 through 12 administrators. We've had some very candid and open dialogue, and we're going to continue that. In addition to what others would see as maybe normal secondary programming is career education. You have career education that falls under the Nichols Career Center umbrella, and then you have career education that will fall under both high schools. And how can we coordinate the efforts, and how can we oversee that to make sure that we don't misstep in everything that needs to be done, from grant writing to programming to program review, that it gets done and it gets done well, and it's just not check the box for compliance. Real quick at the middle school, really a very narrow focus, the workshop instructional model. There's nothing more important than the intentionality of lesson planning and delivering effective instruction each and every period that our teachers are in front of their students. And they're working extremely hard to make that happen. Right now, in the ELA department, we have the most formal training with data teams. And that's just real simple. It's identifying the priority standard over a given instructional period. What do we want the kids to learn? What is the priority? And then you do a formative assessment where you take a look at what the students know and don't know. And then you plan what instruction you're going to provide, what instructional activities, and you do it collectively and hopefully have the biggest impact when everybody's on the same page and you're collaborative. And so we are doing it a little less informally with the math department in the middle schools, but we wanted to start with literacy being an initiative and 100% of students reaching their grade level in reading. That's where our focus has been. That doesn't mean we're going to ignore the other departments, but it made sense to make sure our kids were reading. So, any questions as far as secondary?
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Good report. Moving on to item C, Chief Financial Officer, Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Hoffman.
Hi.
Good evening.
So I'm going to give a presentation about a topic we've been talking about and maybe have a little bit of discussion, but we're just kind of just setting the stage of having the discussion about our transportation and our bell times of our schools. Clicker will work.
I can't wait to tell Joe.
Okay, so we run a tiered routing system, and what that means is, so if we run an 84 passenger bus and we run it once, a single route, our contract with First Student, the daily route times 174 days is $44,320. So if we run that same route, if we run two separate single routes, that's $88,640. But if we double route that, so if they run that first route, they charge us $44,000, and they charge us about $4,500 to run that same bus a second route. So an example of that is bus 2 runs a 43-minute A route for TJ. Once it drops off students at TJ, it then runs a 21-minute route for Bel Air. And so by doubling that, we pay $49,000 for bus 2, where if we had bus 2 and then the second one was bus 3, we would pay $88,000. So you can see it's very financially advantageous for us to try and maximize these tiered routes. So our current bell schedules, almost all of our secondary schools are right at 8 o'clock, 7:50 for the 9 through 12s and 8 o'clock for the 2 middle schools. And then the issue is with our elementary schools, where they're just all over the board. We have North and Callaway Hills at 8 o'clock. We have Morrow Heights and Pioneer Trail at 8:15. We have East, South, Thorpe Gordon and West at 8:30, Bel Air, Cedar Hill, Lawson at 9, and ECSE at 8:50. And I put on there that Southwest Early Childhood, the preschool starts at 8:30, but we don't provide bus services there. So the issues that we're having, and our current schedule isn't working the way it should. And that's because we really don't have enough time between our first tier is really our secondary schools, and then with the elementary spread all over, it's not efficient to put together tiered routing. Just our average secondary routes are 46 minutes. Some are a little bit shorter than that, obviously some are longer, but that's the longest part of our routes are secondary. And so because we're trying to run a tiered routing system with really not enough time between our schools, we're having issues in the service that our students and staff deserve. We're not really giving it to them, and it causes frustration in transportation, and it's really nothing that First Student can do. It's just the system that we've put before them isn't optimal for how we're trying to operate it. And so sometimes, we would like buses to be at school 20 minutes before school in the morning so kids can get in and have breakfast. We'd like the buses to be there in the afternoon on our second tier routes, so as soon as they're out of school, the kids can go right out and get on the bus, and that's not happening everywhere today. And so obviously you can't tier North and Callaway Hills at all, because all of the biggest part of our buses run in the secondary level. We need all of our buses to run the secondary, so to tier we have to have it going opposite of those. So with Callaway Hills and North starting and ending at the exact same times as our secondary, they're running single routes for all of those. There's just no option. We can't really tier Pioneer Trail and Morrow Heights either, and so to offset that, and you think about where Pioneer Trail and Morrow Heights, they serve the extreme east and west of the district. And so we have elementary students on buses in those two with middle school students, or middle school and high school students. So we're running those extreme areas, trying to be efficient, but in doing that, we're crossing grade levels. And then, so we take our shortest secondary routes and we try and tier them with the 8:30 schools, and we try to do the best we can. And last month we came to you and we told you an example. We were trying to run, it was actually at Morrow Heights, we were trying to run Morrow Heights as a second tier route on a TJ bus. And so when you figure they're getting out at 2:50 and Morrow Heights was getting out at 3:15, there was just no way to do it. So we actually had to add a bus that at a cost of $45,000, just because there was no way to efficiently, the bus wasn't getting there. Teachers were having to supervise students for 15-20 minutes after school before they could get on to their activities. And so really the only schools that we can do adequate tiering for are Bel Air, Cedar Hill, Lawson, and ECSE. So currently we have 26 single routes, 37 double routes, and ideally, if money wasn't an object, we would say, all right, what's the ideal start and end time for all schools? We would have it there and we wouldn't have to worry about the tiering. But being good stewards, we've gone this route. So if we were to decide that, it would cost an extra $1.5 million. And so even if we had an extra $1.5 million, I don't know that we could find 37 additional drivers. We're having a hard enough time finding good drivers today, and so if we had to find 37 more, that's probably a bigger challenge than even the $1.5 million. So those inefficiencies get worse. With running a single comprehensive high school, it's pretty efficient how we do transportation 9 through 12 also. We run the whole district and we come to one spot. And so now if we're running in 2 separate areas, it's a little less efficient. So First Student has run projections, and it's anywhere between 5 and 8 more first tier routes are going to be needed as we open Capital City High School if we don't do anything different. So that's an increase in cost of $225,000 to $360,000. And again, 5 to 8 more bus drivers over what we're looking at now. So the recommendation is we really need to appropriately set our start and end time so we have a 1 hour difference in the start and end times. So we would have all elementary buildings start at the same time. That's been a request of the elementary division for not transportation related, not anything. It's just having them all on different times is hard for them to do collaboration, hard for when we talked at faculty council about this a little bit last week, and Charlotte Bouthaud's in charge of librarians. She's saying, yeah, if I try to get all the librarians together, there's really no good way for us to do that since we're all over the board on when we start and end school. So that's a different discussion, but that's an advantage of doing this. And then we currently have basically all of our secondary buildings start at the same time. And I was surprised, First Student ran projections of what this would look like, and they said there's financially no difference which group starts first. I thought there would be an advantage for the elementary starting first. So as we look at which way we go, finances aren't going to be a reason. There's no difference in cost. But
Could I just interject, just for clarification here, as far as there's not a recommendation to make this change, this is we're exploring this, see what it would look like, just to poke holes in it and see, so just for some clarification
Right.
With that.
So by doing this, it would allow us to be more efficient, allow for more double-tiered routes. And so taking all the students forward, running for Capital City High School, we would actually save $161,000 over what we're doing this year. So an apples to apples comparison is a savings of $161,000 or an increase of $225 to $360 if we don't do anything. So the bottom line, so the cost difference of what we're doing now versus changing and having a 1 hour start time difference is roughly $500,000 a year. And then if we have an hour, that remedies the service issues that we're having with buses not getting where we need them to when we want them there. So this isn't decided, but just an example of what it would look like, either having all elementary start at around 7:50, it could be 8 o'clock, all that's up for debate, and then all the secondary schools an hour later, and then option 2 would be exactly the same, just reversed. So then going through the pros and cons, we've been through this before, so we know a lot of this already. And one of the pros of elementary school starting earlier, there's a lot of research out there that shows the need for later start times for secondary students. I put a link out there. There's an organization called Start Schools Later. They have a ton of research on there. It's all the endorsements of all the different physician groups. So there's a lot of research out there that secondary schools need to be starting later than 8:30 is their cutoff time. So there's not really a lot of scientific evidence about what starting earlier for elementary students would be, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that says younger students really get tired later in the day. So from our schools that get out at 4 o'clock, you see that we have some 8:30 schools. They used to be later and they've been moved up just for that reason. So we've had a trend of us moving our elementary start times up over the years. So if you think about our secondary routes, the average are 46 minutes and our elementary routes are 26 minutes, because if you think about the elementary, we're serving a neighborhood. So if you do your elementary first, that first pickup in the morning is going to be later in the day by an average of 20 minutes. It allows additional second tier routes. So if you think, I told you earlier that we need all of our buses to run the secondary routes. So if we have a bus that doesn't have a first tier and it's just got to be at a secondary building at 4 o'clock, and say we have 3 buses at a building and the buses are fairly crowded and they're running longer routes, it's really easy to take that bus, move it to that building, spread those 3 students over to 4, so we have fewer students on the bus, they're running shorter routes, and the cost of that is $4,500. It makes it easier to reduce those capacities. Having a 8:50 or 9 o'clock start time gets our high school student drivers off the roads early in the morning when we have state rush hour traffic. If they're coming in at 8:50 or 9 o'clock, they're avoiding that time. Cons, I know this will be the biggest pushback to this, and it's a real issue that currently, with having secondary students on that first tier, they get home before the elementary students, and so say you have a 9th grader rides the bus, gets home, you have an elementary student that's at a 9 o'clock school, gets home later, that is the childcare for that family. And so that goes away in that reverse. So it is a significant issue. Just change. We know how difficult change is, and this would change the start times for every building, significantly change the start time for most buildings in the district except for the 2 Callaway County elementary students, or the 2 buildings there, sorry. Obviously, after school activities are going to go later in the evening. If you get out of school an hour later, that's going to go later in the evening. I feel like that will be offset a little bit by the fact that we're now having 2 schools. We'll be competing more regionally and not having to go to St. Louis, Kansas City, and Springfield as often. We'll still be making those trips, and we'll have more gyms going forward. But there's no doubt it still will be later in the evening if you're getting out an hour later.
And the start times of the conference,
Oh, true.
the Columbia might just touch on that.
So we are in the process of starting a conference with 3 Columbia schools, 3 Jeff City schools, and Sedalia. And Columbia's, I think they're 9 to 4 currently at their high schools. So it would be matching up with what their schools are doing. So in reverse of having, with elementary going first and having the first stop be later in the morning, if the routes are longer in the evening, that means the last student dropped off in the evening is going to be later in the day with this one. And Gary, right before the meeting, pointed out that this would be a change also for our sending schools, sending students to us, to Nichols Career Center. They're all starting at an earlier time now. So then going, if we were looking at the other option, most of this is just the opposite. Obviously, the pro to this secondary going earlier is you have older siblings at home to provide the child care for their elementary students. Fewer schools would actually be changing their times. We'd be moving some of our elementary schools later, but all the secondaries would stay about the same, so it's less change. After school activities are going to finish earlier. It does go against the research of when optimal learning and for secondary students. This one is a different one for just this scenario. And so I've mentioned a couple times we need all of our buses to run the secondary routes. So if you think about in the afternoon, you have a 4 o'clock elementary school. If they're on a field trip, that bus has to be back by 2:30. Those kids have to be back at their elementary school by 2:30 so that bus can then get back and run a secondary route. Where if it's flipped, that bus just has to be at Thomas Jefferson or at a secondary school by 4 o'clock. It can run the whole elementary field trip. So relatively minor, but I do think it is a con with this one. Earlier morning bus stops due to longer routes for secondary buildings. We're running that average 46-minute route first, so their students will be getting on the bus earlier. And so just the opposite, it hasn't come up, but if we went with the secondary students going second, they would be there in the morning to help. It's not what we do now, so people don't see that, but so like I said, we've been through this, we know a lot of that, we're gonna get more feedback. So our next steps is just wanted to get in front of this group and say, is this something that we're ready to keep moving forward and continue to investigate. We're not making a recommendation at all, and if we get the green light to move forward, we'll start scheduling meetings at buildings to get feedback from parents and staff. We'll schedule community town halls at each middle school, and with the plan to come back with a recommendation of something at the January board meeting for a first reading, allow people to give feedback at open forum, and then come back for a second reading and final approval at the February meeting. So really just opening the conversation, making sure you guys are okay with us moving forward.
I'm sure some folks have thoughts about this.
I've got a question.
Yeah, I have questions or comments do you have for Jeff?
What does this do with the, trying to think of a specific word to use, at Simonson, where all the cluster of the transferring, and
That's
does
a
that
good
do
word,
anything
cluster.
with? Well, it's not the word I wanted, but it's the only one that I can actually say on TV, so therefore, that's what happens with live stream.
So all that goes away next year, just us not being at Simonson. So either way, that goes away. Just opening of Capital City High School, we'll work through how we do transfers based on what our transportation system is, but it won't be on city streets in the middle of town,
So-
which
But most likely, the Callaway County kids will still probably be, you'll have a mixture of middle school and high school.
I would think so, just because some of those routes are so long, to run it really 3 times is not efficient at all.
Okay.
So I'm guessing we will have some form of transfer. It'll just not be
There.
in the middle of town on city streets.
I was just curious from a historical perspective, how have the elementary times been set historically so that we pick where we are with all these different times? I mean, how did that happen?
So I reached out to John Rodeman, and so he's how I'm sure all of these came about. He was the transportation director here. He was a math teacher here, then he was the transportation director at First Student, then he came and was the transportation director for the district, and so has a ton of knowledge. And so he was trying to walk me through back to 1982 when somebody had the contract and they put it out to somebody else, and so they moved to 9 o'clock, and he has a whole story. But it's really just, it's my understanding that most of them were at 9 o'clock, and they found out that a lot of elementary students are up. They're not supervised at home sometimes, and so they're just up and out and wandering, and so having it start earlier was beneficial. They're up already, get them in school, let's get learning going, is how it's been explained to me in the past. But that would be something good to try and work through the history. It would take going through board meeting notes probably.
I mean,
but-
whether it was driven, I just wonder whether it's driven by our district initiative, our district efforts, or was it driven by transportation, the transportation side of the house, or,
It was
where-
not transportation, because it's my understanding that there was pushback because it doesn't work well with transportation to move them up. They need to be moved back. I mean, if we do anything, we need to move Moral Heights back off that 815. We need to move Pioneer Trail off that 815, because us trying to do routing with them, double-tiered routing with them, it just doesn't work. And those 830 ones are super difficult. It's an interesting, and Frank's done it a lot, but it's like a game of Tetris to say, how can we make this fit here, and it's pretty complex.
I guess my other question would be how practical it is for us to look at the fact that with holidays and things like that, the ability to get the necessary feedback and the different stakeholders at the table and really get valid input from them in the time frame that you're talking about by having a recommendation of a first reading in January. I find that hard to believe that we can do that.
And we're walking a fine line of trying to make sure we get adequate feedback and input, but also notify parents early enough so that they can make plans for next year. So moving it back a month is easier for us, for sure, but is it a disservice to our families?
Concern I have.
It's a fair point. Holiday activities and just everything else that gets on the calendar in terms of being able to make those meetings. So,
Right.
Sure, that's a fair point. Lindsay?
Well, I completely agree with making it consistent across the board. It's confusing and, you know, people ask you when a school starts and I have to look it up online to try to figure it out. I mean, I've read a lot of the same studies that show that the younger kids learn better earlier, and I think the hard part is the things going later in the day, but those kids are also going to go to school later. So some of those kids are going to weightlifting at 5 o'clock in the morning. We can maybe keep them in a bit longer. Now my younger ones are up and going, and the older ones are kind of dragging a little bit in the morning. So I would definitely be supportive
So
of getting
Jason,
those consistent.
so Jason, if you start the high school kids later, they're in the workforce. So our workforce is going to have less workers to show up on time. Those kids are ones maybe helping mom and dad with bills at the end of the month too. So we're taking money out of mom and dad's pockets. We got to kind of look at that as
Yeah,
well,
that needs to be added. You're
because
right.
that's huge.
That was going to be my concern. I know a lot of these after-school care, the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Clubs are hiring students. Well, they can't help now unless we figure out the flex program, some sort of a program where we can offer for these. Not going to be able to staff their after school.
No.
And to your point, my kid ran cross country on the streets. If they start at 4 o'clock, he's going to be finishing in the dark
Yeah.
at 6:30. So I think it's really important to get feedback, all the activities, to say, be able to flip your practice times to the morning. Have your main run in the morning when it's day, because that's a safety issue. You know, but, you know,
I think you need to-
that's my concern.
I think you need to make sure you bring in the business force of Jeff City as well and ask them how it's going to impact them, because that is huge. That's going to be the number one thing. We're going to affect a lot of companies in town. If we start pulling these kids, they don't get to work till 5
Right.
instead of 3:30. It's an hour and a half.
Conversations with Columbia. Columbia, 3 or 4 years ago, went to their tiered, moved their secondary schools, their high school Battle. When Battle opened, Hickman and Rockbridge to a 9 o'clock. And it was extremely painful, they said, when they went through it. If they could hit the rewind button, and would they change? And they said absolutely not, that it's been great, that it was changing it. So we recognize that. I think we should just explore the cost savings alone, and explore, weigh the pros and cons, and you all have great points, and we need to consider all those and just have the conversation.
I think that's fair. The cost savings, to your point, I mean, cost savings alone, I think necessitates a discussion, but, I mean, Scott, you make great points. Lorelei, also, the timeline, I think is also fair in terms of making sure that you've got ample opportunity to get feedback from folks. And I worked in public service for 20 plus years, and so most of those jobs, they start at 7:30 or 8 o'clock, and so depending on what you do, so I think, I'm sure you expected that there were going to be
Absolutely.
tossed that you wouldn't necessarily be able
expect
to
an
answer this
approval.
evening. I go back to, right. I go back to what the question was. I think you were looking for just some consensus out in terms of whether or not the administration wants to go forward and schedule the meetings and do the additional legwork like you discussed. So, while you guys have shared some questions that I think certainly need to be answered, is the consensus that we need with some continued discussions with the community about this, or do we need to?
You could seek feedback from all stakeholders.
Yeah.
I agree.
We just need to ensure we get the adequate opportunity to hear from everybody.
Right.
Thank you.
Jason.
Thanks, Jason. Good work. Appreciate it.
We should have snowflakes instead of leaves in the back.
Next item of business, Director of Facilities update from Mr. Weber. Talk to us about the site.
All right, thank you.
You're going to make it bigger?
Is it 14 font or
You're
larger?
going to make it bigger?
1986.
You're going to add on that, oh boy. We're going to not build the second school and add on to Simonson. Is that what you're saying tonight?
That's your all's decision. After you see what I have, you'll have to give that some thought. What I handed out was back when we started the long-range planning committee, and I think Laura, Steve might remember, we had HCI Bowling go around to every school and do an inspection and analysis. And it's a standardized program that is used by facility planners, so it's not their own type of. Anyway, as you can see on the front page of bottom line, is Simonson scored a 68%. Now Larry's terminology, or Larry's classification have B at D, is that not correct?
I think so, maybe a D plus.
D plus maybe. And actually, when I went to school, that would have been an I. Does everybody know ES, M, and I and F? I think, okay, that would have been an inferior or an I. So. But anyway, and then also, and Larry had asked in December of 2015, I had a structural engineer come in, Allstate consultants, and really look at the building from a structural standpoint. And even though they noted some tuck pointing, some roofing, some exterior concrete steps and things of that nature, the building itself, the foundation, the structure is sound. It's not going to fall down. It's not leaning, but it does need some exterior tuck pointing and work like that. I did not employ a mechanical engineer to come in and evaluate, but sitting down with our staff, my heating and air folks, and John, our maintenance supervisor, and Wes Schulte, our project manager, the building is going to need new heating and air. That's the biggest ticket item. What's in there is 25 years old. The chiller we can't get parts for anymore. It's what they call a two-pipe system. You either got to be in heating or cooling. You can't do both, and that's not very good, especially like September and April. You know, that building might get hot one day, 70 degrees, and where you want to turn the air on and you can't, because you can't run both at one time. The elevator really needs to be replaced. It's not very good shape. The last couple of years, you all approved, we've done quite a bit of roofing because we had to, but there's still some sections that remain. The building really needs a lot of plaster repair and painting. Of course, when we get into the mechanical, heating and air, we're gonna encounter some asbestos. But anyway, those items, I estimated we were looking at $3.8 to $4 million for the mechanical, the elevator, the painting, the remaining roofing, asbestos abatement, and so forth. Really, that's probably needs to be done in 1 to 2, 3 years. It'd be nice to do it before it was reoccupied, if you were going to reoccupy it. Longer term, the building really needs windows. It needs some additional restroom renovations. It needs more efficient lighting, even though what we put in lighting about 10 years ago, T8s has saved us a lot of money versus T12s, and Rich might know what I'm talking about, but anyway, now the most efficient is LED lighting, and Simonson has pretty significant electrical bill, so really the lighting ought to be upgraded. And I would anticipate that probably be another couple of million to do, and that's plumbing and electrical. Now it depends on how many students you have put back in. If we decompress, there may not be quite as much demand on the electrical load there. But during the bond issue, I think there was some photographs of all the extension cords running around through the building. Now we've been able to to work on some of that, but there's just not enough receptacles in the classrooms. When those schools were built, even Jeff City High School, usually there's one in the classroom up by the teacher's desk, maybe two, one up above for a clock, you know, and just not a lot of electric. So you do all that, and you still come down to the thing that scored the worst on the scorers page is the site. Scored a 63. What do we do with the site? There's inadequate ADA parking, you know, the entryways on a slope. If you decompress, you're gonna have probably ample parking in the parking lot across the street, but you still got the site there that's not the best. So it sits on a hill. If they want to do playground equipment, I guess you might could put some in on the north side, but anyway, the site is not the best. We've worked, you know, we've managed it and worked with it and probably could continue, but you're really gonna have to look somehow to address the ADA at the front of the building better than what it is today.
So Tom, let me ask you, you've given us a handout here with a list of 33 concern areas. So what would it cost to alleviate those?
A lot of those, several of those will go away once, you know, the ninth grade center stops going there. You know, it says parking during an event is inadequate, was one of them. Well, you know, you got 600 kids and the parents come in, yeah, the parking's inadequate, but if you decompress, and I don't know what the plans are, you might be okay. Item 17, I'm just looking over at, that's the two-pipe heating system that would be addressed. We've done some, item 7, lack of security cameras, we've taken care of that already.
5 million to complete the list? I mean, is
Say
that what I'm
5, 6,
hearing from you,
7.
that you talked the first 5 were gonna be 3.8 million, and then you talk about $5 million?
5 to 6.
5.8 to
5.8
6,
million?
you know, 6.
Do we have any idea how much it costs us to operate that building?
That's gonna be my next question.
From a
Like,
utility standpoint?
Yeah, just
Yeah.
everything. Insurance, utility, I mean, how much does it cost for us to just open the doors there? I'd like to know that sometime in the future. I mean, I'd just like to have that answer when we kind of.
Anecdotally, you know, the utilities are high, but you want to know what the real cost is.
Right, I'd just like to know that when we're considering what we're going to do with that
Yeah.
facility.
The other question I would have is, if you look at what we consider to be adequate space in other buildings, and what DESI recommends, or whatever guideline we use for, you know, square footage per student, what's the ideal number of students that would be housed in that building? I mean, we know it's overcrowded now, we know it's way over capacity, but what is, if we were to retrofit it, do all these things to get it up to snuff facilities wise, realistically, how many students would we put there?
Yeah, I didn't copy that. Generally, some rules of thumb, and they may have changed some, but elementary, 135 square foot per student, and secondary, 150 is kind of
What's the total square footage on, I mean, is that?
and it's 90,000 square foot.
And that's
So if
all
you had secondary
usable,
students
that's all
or-
usable educational teaching space?
Well,
Right.
That's what I mean.
Yes, that should incorporate the cafeteria, the hallways, and so forth. Simonson has a big gym, and Simonson has got an auditorium that most schools don't have. So we'd have to kind of look at that.
I just
but-
I'd be interested to know, again, anecdotally, the cost, and then if you really said, okay, the classroom teaching space that we've got there, how many students would we ideally, if you were saying, let's do ideal, how many students would you put in that building?
That was something that ACI had in there, was it
Yeah.
635 or something, was? what
It's
it-
in that thing,
I
planning committee. what
I can't
capacity.
recall exactly, but.
If you take your 90,000 multiply by your 150, it comes to 600. Okay, and that's assuming that that is a positive learning environment with that, but it's just far as capacity wise, around 600.
But you've got 600 secondary students, you don't have parking for that, for sure. For
Oh,
sure.
absolutely
not, no.
Lorelei, we spent $115,000 last year just on heating and air at Simon
For the whole year.
for the whole year.
I thought it was gonna be more than that.
Just a couple things to point out here. I think that we have space issues, K through 8. We've shared that. Both our middle schools are over capacity. We have space issues in our elementary schools. And as we look at, if we're saying Simonson, a building was built in 1903, how much, when is the line of determining your costs outweigh you know, the positives and the negatives. So we do have needs, and we need to assess and look at that. So Gary, Bridget, Lori, Brian, I've asked them to look at alternative options for a school district. We have needs, we have student behavioral issues that we know that we need to improve as a consideration. Not saying that that's the answer. If we're saying that it's not adequate for 700 students by the passing of the J+C for Capital City High School, but would it be for fewer students? Would that be the best option to consider of a building of that age and spending $6 million to get it there? Everybody's got an opinion on that. I think you need to consider that, but we're trying to evaluate that, assess it, poke holes into it, look at the pros and cons, and then be able to make a recommendation or discussion going forward.
Good luck.
Do you guys have any other questions while Jason looks that up, or anything you would like to us to, we can get the actual, not just only heating and cooling, but all the costs. And we'll get you an exact number. We'll get that for you. That's a great question, and then we can get that answer.
Not to put you on the spot.
632.
The number that ACI bought.
632. Okay.
We have the building insured, and we've worked with our insurance company. They're not certified appraisals, but they have a program where they enter the square foot and the acreage and so forth. It's currently insured at 13.3 million, that building.
You okay over there?
I think I was gonna choke on my.
That's based on the square foot, I mean, to really probably to replace 90,000 square foot. A rule of thumb, and I don't know whether, you know, you can, it's a judgment thing, but when you start approaching renovation costs that exceed close to 50%, then, you know, usually you're, if you go over 50%, then you're headed the wrong direction. So we're getting real close to that halfway point, so.
Personally, I tend to think that it's an extremely old building. It's seen a lot of history, and it's been very good. I won't say very good, but it's served a good purpose for us for a number of years. It's been repurposed over its lifetime, but you know, I tend to think that based on the work that you guys are doing, the vision that you have set for the school district, you know, my question would be as to whether or not Simonson going forward fits into that vision in terms of being a premier school district and the level of quality that we want for our students, regardless of who's in there, and the staff that are teaching there as well, working there. So would you expect? It sounds like you're continuing to do some work. You got a couple of items to run down. Are you anticipating bringing some additional information back to us in the next month or two with a recommendation, or how would you like to proceed?
Well, I think our time frame, I know with the gymnasium not being completed at Capital City High School starting next fall, not being ready until November 1, that we have a need for gymnasium space, as well as Thomas Jefferson coordinating that for Capital City High School. So we're not under the gun as far as with, you know, we're making a recommendation of selling or some other option here by July 1 because we anticipate some possible needs there. But we do want to have a plan. What is the plan moving forward with Simonson while we're still being a good steward of patrons' money? So my recommendation at this time would be that we get these specific numbers. We continue and ask our folks, as I said, to kind of assess our options and what that would look like, potentially what is the need, And if that's the best fit, and if it's not, we can make that recommendation and then move forward accordingly.
So item for future discussion.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
Good report.
I will say, the last time we were in there, that building was as clean as could be.
Absolutely.
So obviously very well cared for.
It's an amazing thing. It really is.
Well,
I just went on a tour a month ago, and I was amazed at the awesome activity that was going on there with the space that they
Didn't
had.
happen by accident.
No.
well, that maintenance staff has won the award, haven't they, for the cleanest building in the last?
Multiple years.
Yep.
They're doing a great
Yeah,
job.
and the staff there does a tremendous job with the space they have.
Yeah, they make it look as great as it can.
Moving on to the next item, and we're going to hear from Mrs. Brenda Hatfield, Director of Quality Improvement Update. Brenda, you're going to talk to us about the survey.
I am, and I'm going to bring my friend Shelby up. I don't know if she wants to come now or in a few minutes, but Shelby and I have had a lot of fun talking with the staff, both in person and via the survey. So we'd like to share some survey results with you. Maestro.
Says?
That's what it says. Panorama is the company that we hired. They are an education-based company. They have a lot of research behind the product that they sell, and we were very excited to work with them. They work with 700 school districts in this country, and that represents 5 million students. And so we really wanted to make sure that we had some comparative data that would help us understand the relative importance of certain things. We did the 3-week survey window. Originally, they recommended a 2-week window and told us that we should expect a 45% response rate, to which I said that was completely unacceptable and we would hit 65. Larry said we would hit higher than 65. So Larry and I held it open a little bit longer and we hit 75.5%. So we're very pleased with that response rate and very excited that so many of our staff took time to give us their feedback, because we can't act on something if we don't actually know what folks want us to be concerned about. We did this survey at the end of August and the beginning of September, and I want you to think about that as we go through some of these results, because there are a couple of areas that I think the scores are reflective of when we did the survey. And we'll talk to you about when we would like to do the survey in the future, but it was those first, they'd only really been in school 2 weeks and then we issued a survey. Had to be done at some time. There's never a good time, there's never a bad time, but just as we look at these results, it is important we think about that. 21% of the people who took my survey were non-certified staff, and 79% were certified staff. So that's all of our teachers, that's all of our PCBAs, that's all of those folks that are certified staff for us. So we're very excited about that. I'm going to show you results with that they call favorable, which was a 5-point Likert scale, and so it's always those top 2 boxes is their 5-point Likert scale.
Which I might just, you could argue both ways, but for those folks that say, I don't really matter, that just would go down the middle, they're not included in that. Maybe they're not negative, but they're not, saying we're hitting it out of the park. I mean, it is relative. You can compare all because they were all with that scale.
Yep.
But it did not include anybody that was just down the middle.
Correct. Those are not considered favorable in our world. So the survey had we had all these focus areas. I believe there's 7 of them. Jason will check my mouth. There's 8 actually. Staff leadership relationships, which was all about relationships and trust within buildings. School leadership is about leader effectiveness. School climate is about work environment, hope for the future, and something that makes this survey a little bit more fascinating for us. It's both adult behavior and student behavior. So there's a question in school climate that is, how often do you see children without prompting helping each other in your school? So that's a pretty interesting question that I don't know that most people would have put under school climate, but we're pretty excited about that because that gives us another sense of things that we could maybe work on in our buildings. Professional learning was about the type and the amount of professional development, of course. Staff-family relationships, that's communication with families, how easy it is for us to communicate with them, how often we communicate with them, and then trust families have with the school district from, again, the teacher or the staff member's perspective. Feedback and coaching, which is about the amount and type of feedback. And this is the area where I'd like you to remember when I did that survey. So our staff get periodic evaluations from their supervisors, just like at your companies, but they don't necessarily get those within the first 3 weeks of school. And so some of the scores here reflect the fact that people probably hadn't had a visit from their principal or their supervisor. Again, we started this survey the 3rd week of school, so it's not expected that principals would have talked to staff at that point. But again, those are some questions that we ask people. So when somebody says, well, I haven't gotten a lot of feedback this year, well, no, you probably didn't, because it just wasn't the time. Was it correct? And then we added some JCPS questions, which were about trust and communication. I obviously have no national data to back those questions up with, but we did want to add a couple of our own questions, which we did, and they were very helpful with, and their statisticians helped us design those questions. Sorry, Jason, I'm ready. So I've given you secondary favorable, elementary favorable for certified, district certified, and then I've given you non-certified favorable. The non-certified folks, remember, those are going to be my custodians, those are going to be my food service folks primarily, and so we're going to talk with those managers separately, but instead of pulling out custodians separate from food service, I've just left them all together. Our high there is, if you'll look, staff leadership relationships is our high across the board for all of those categories, and we're very excited about that and feel really positive about that. That's followed, number 2, by our school leadership. Also very excited about that because, again, that speaks highly for our building principals and the folks that we have in those buildings. Feedback and coaching was one of our lower. Again, looking back, hindsight's 2020, I don't know that it's fair to expect those numbers to have been very high, given the fact that in the first couple of weeks of school, our principals and our supervisors are actually not out giving significant amounts of feedback at that point. The JCPS questions, and we'll show you those in a minute, did score low. Those are about communication primarily, is our lowest area from the district office. Do they feel like we give them enough communication? Is there enough two-way communication going back and forth? Shelby and I'll talk to you about how we intend to address that. Obviously, those are very disappointing numbers for the JCPS questions, although with 1,489 employees, I'm not terribly surprised that some of them don't feel that we do the best job of communicating. Not a significant problem that most companies don't face. I think most of us do have that problem. But I'm going to give you some examples. Staff leadership relationships, that area that we were very excited about. Here's some samples of the questions. So how friendly are your school leaders toward you? And then we would have had responses like extremely friendly, somewhat friendly, all the way down to not friendly at all. How confident are you that school leaders have the best interests of the school in mind? And how much trust exists between leaders and faculty or staff. And you can see our individual responses for that, Jason. So for our certified staff, our comparative data here, we're in the 40th percentile, and that was with a 70% score on that. So you can see why the comparative data is pretty darn important for us to truly understand where we are. Obviously, we were very excited about a 70, and I think we should be very proud of that, but we obviously have some work to do to increase that a little bit more. Would you like to show me non-certified? Non-certified, that score was 62%, which put us in the 30th percentile for those folks. School leadership. These questions were things like how positive is the tone set by school leaders for the culture? How effective are school leaders at developing rules for students that facilitate their learning? Isn't that a fascinating question? I really like that one. And how responsive are school leaders to your feedback? We were at 59% for the district, and that is the 60th percentile. So again, that's why I feel it's really important that we make sure that we're getting a company to service us that can give us that data. One would have hoped that 70% was a really fine score, but that was the 40th percentile as opposed to a 59, which put us in the 60th percentile for their schools.
Brenda, question on your national database, is that a national data for schools of all sizes, shapes, and sizes, or is that a demographic that's similar to ours?
So this is medium free and reduced lunch, non-urban settings.
Okay.
So I can pick, there's some options that I can give them on us, so we can play around with that and get a better sense. But yes, those are same free and reduced lunch or similar from their national data set, along with non-urban.
Okay.
And it is fascinating when you have them show us versus all schools or versus urban. It is kind of interesting to look at. And non-certified is, we're in the 40th percentile and we're at 52%, again, for leadership. School climate. How positive are the attitudes of your colleagues? How optimistic are you that your school will improve in the future? And on most days, how enthusiastic are students about being at school? So, can we go back to this question? I'm sorry, Jason. So that last question is fascinating to me because anybody have middle schoolers or high schoolers? Yeah. Any guess as to what those teachers might have told us versus the elementary? So I don't know if there are any big shockers there, but when you look at the school climate numbers, which is why I'm very excited about how this company does school climate, I think it's the right questions to ask, but we do have to pause. We're meeting with Bob James and staff tomorrow, and I don't remember Bob's numbers here, but Bob will probably be a little unhappy to learn that his teachers don't think 100% of his students are enthusiastic to be at school. But I suspect I'm going to tell him that, as I've had to tell middle school teachers as well.
They were today when we sent them home 2 hours early.
That's probably right. I should have asked the teachers today. So school climate, we scored 49%, which is the 39th percentile, again, for the free and reduced lunch of medium and non-urban. Our non-certified staff, it's actually in the 20th percentile. It's professional learning, something obviously we're very committed to as an educational organization. Questions like overall how supportive has the school been of your growth as a teacher? At your school, how valuable are available professional development opportunities? Obviously very important for us to understand whether or not folks feel like the amount of professional development that we're engaged in is providing them with a great deal of value. And how helpful are your colleagues' ideas for improving your teaching or your work? And our results are 60th percentile scored at 50%. So we're very excited about that. We do have some significant work to do with our non-certified staff. And we knew that going in. They don't feel like they're getting enough professional development and enough learning. We have made a concerted effort on certain areas with our secretaries and with our paraprofessionals this year. Shelby and I have been working with them, 15 months now. But we still have an incredible amount of work to do to get out of that 30th percentile. Staff-family relationships. How often do you meet in person with the families of students? How friendly are your school's families toward you? And how challenging is it to communicate with families of students at your school? Again, I bet you're going to guess that Bob James tomorrow will not get 100% on that last one. Because his folks do feel it is a challenge to communicate with families, as I'm sure Lorelei and I will be there Thursday night for conferences, but it will be easy to find parking. The only time at the high school. So again, with the free and reduced lunch, we're at the 10th percentile with our certified staff. And this has to do a lot with our secondary education, not feeling that it is very easy sometimes to have those staff-family relationships. And Shelby and I are going to talk to you about some of the things that we're going to do next, and some of the things that some of our buildings have committed to, especially in this area, to attempt to fix this. Non-certified, again, the 10th percentile, 39% positive. Feedback and coaching. How often do you receive feedback on your work? How much do you learn from the evaluation process? And at your school, how thorough is the feedback you receive? These were our primary questions, and I thought these were also very, very good questions. There are also some questions about amount of feedback that you receive. 40th percentile, 40% in this particular one, so a little bit of work. But again, I'm telling you, I do believe the time of year did have a significant impact on this one. It's very difficult those first couple of weeks to have done a truckload of feedback and coaching on employees who just got back. Non-certified staff, 36% in the 30th percentile in this area. The JCPS questions that we wrote with their assistants. How positive is the tone that the district leaders set for the culture of the school? And how much trust exists between district leaders and staff? And how effectively do district leaders communicate important information? It's supposed to be important information to teachers. Jason. So this one I don't have any comparisons on. So I will tell you though that for those staff ones, it was the communication one was our biggest opportunity for improvement. And I'm not surprised. Everybody has this problem, but it was a little distressing for all of us because Larry would like to have 100% on absolutely everything. And I'll get you there, Larry. It's just going to take me a little while.
Did you hear her say that?
Yeah, I did. I'll get you there. It's not going to be tomorrow though. So Shelby's going to talk to us about what we're going to do next.
So what we have been doing is identifying, obviously we want to celebrate the successes that we have. And we also want to identify growth opportunities. So we want to make sure people are aware that we're proud of the fact that our staff indicated that we have solid staff leadership relationships and that they have confidence in our school leadership. So we're taking these growth opportunities, doing two things. One is working with our administrative council.
the JCPS questions that identified some need for improvement with communication and trust between district leaders and in our buildings. Those are some areas that we're going to tackle as an administrative council. One of the things that we are doing right now is rounding. So all of us are assigned to buildings, and we are going weekly into the buildings and just meeting with various staffs at various times, just to see how things are going, to check in with them, just to be a presence. We are also, Brenda and I are visiting individually with every building principal. And so those meetings are us presenting their building data, celebrating the strengths that they've identified, and then looking at their growth opportunities and determining next steps with their buildings. And so it's a mix right now. They want us to meet with their leadership team, and the leadership team will determine how we are going to share the information with the staff. And some want us to just meet directly with the staff. Here's what your building people said. How do you want to work this data so that we can identify some action steps and set some goals, and then we will monitor those goals. The most important thing that we want to send a message is that you took the time to take the survey, and we are going to work this feedback with you. Own the data. If you have things that you feel we need to grow, we are going to work at helping you grow in those areas. So setting those goals and those action steps, and then Brenda and I, as part of our work on AC in our group of employee engagement and development, we're really going to use this data to help drive some of that. An example, as Brenda mentioned, like when we were at one of the secondary schools, they really know that they have to do a better job of communicating with families, getting that information to parents. And one of the things that we mentioned is, how do parents want to be communicated with? What is the expectation on when do you expect the students to go home and communicate information, and when does the school need to directly communicate with parents? And through what method do we need to communicate? So those are some of the things as we meet with the building staff, really making an effort. Okay, we are going to make sure we have communication with families once a week, and these are the methods that you need to communicate with them. And those are just examples of some things that we will work through with the buildings on that. Our goal is to reissue this same survey in 1 year. Just to see how much growth we've made in those areas, but at the same time give the buildings a chance to really work this feedback for more than just a couple of months. It'll be the rest of this school year, the start of next, and then a year from now, November, December of 2019, we'll issue it again and see how we've grown. We have worked with some of the buildings that would like to take maybe the feedback and coaching and reissue the survey at the end of the school year, just to kind of take a little dipstick assessment to see if they are making progress in the direction that they want to go. And so we will work with individual buildings on that. And then our goal is to share with all of you quarterly feedback on how we are making it with each of the buildings, what the building's action plans are, how they're making it with their goals, just so you're abreast of the things that are happening in the buildings. This isn't something in addition to what they're doing with their building goals. We hope that if we identify one area, where are they going to have the biggest bang for their buck that's going to impact everything that's happening in their buildings. So we want this to kind of all go together with what they're doing anyway, recognizing areas for improvement and how they're going to get that done. So we're excited. It's been fun getting out to the buildings and sharing this information with principals, and we have another busy week of getting into buildings this week, but it's good stuff, and we're glad that we have some things to work from, because sometimes having difficult conversations, when you have data in front of you, it makes those conversations a little bit easier. So, any questions?
Questions for us?
Did you break down the responses in regards to tenure of staff in any way, shape, or form?
We have not at this point. We can, but at this point, we have enough to digest. And they told us those results were not going to be significant.
Okay.
Based on our overall results, so not to spend our energy in that direction.
Okay.
So we kind of went with what they said.
Yes, because they recommend go holistically with the building rather than dive down, because you're going to pinpoint, oh, the people that have been here don't like the direction we're going. They just wanted to take it holistically at the beginning.
And we already have problems with, when you say we went to XYZ school and 32 staff members responded, and they know that's all of them, and it's like, and however many are very favorable, and there's one that's not. Then they start going, So we're trying to avoid all of those sort of complications in our world, and instead get them to really look at the data from the big perspective, because they all have something to work on. But it's all exciting stuff. So far, everybody's been very positive about the whole thing, so we're very excited about that. Now, if we can meet with the leadership teams and meet with staff directly so that they have a sense. At this point, we have not met with all the principals, so not all the building leaders even have their data. They've only seen
starting November 2nd, and then you'll finish
early next week.
So round one.
Yeah.
And round two starts all of the faculty meetings that we're going to do. So
We hope to have a meeting tomorrow.
A meeting with all the principals and all of the buildings, either their leadership team or their whole staff, before Christmas break. So.
So, two things. Do the principals meet with each teacher before the first day of school, just kind of introduce himself and kind of go over the goals for the year?
I'm gonna go to the secondary people for that.
Or elementary.
I know that brand new teachers sit down with a longer session with each building principal at their own designated site, and then principals are sitting down with their entire staff. and talking about
One-on-one?
vision and-
One-on-one?
No, I wouldn't say one-on-one before the school year begins.
Why would you not want to meet one-on-one with your staff to give them goals and your thoughts before the school started out?
Sometimes it's, sometimes it's, 2.5 days is that all they have before the school year starts. So they're meeting with grade level teams, so that's three teachers and one.
Terrible excuse. And 54% is good?
According to this, yes, it's not bad.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. That's
But
fine.
the first thing that you talked about, the staff all do professional growth plans, and last spring with our staff that we have right now, when they did their growth progress for the school year, they started looking at goals for next year. So
Sure.
they do have those one-on-one
But do you
conversations.
see where I'm coming from? Don't you, most companies have one-on-one meetings with your staff to have
And
that
they do that,
communication?
but prior to school, there isn't always a lot of time, but they do have a fall, when they set their fall growth, discuss that again, when their growth plans are due like middle to end of September. Then they do have those conferences again with the teachers. So they do have an opportunity to do that. It may just not happen right at the rush when school's starting.
And that's why we're concerned about the feedback and coaching not necessarily being a fair score at this
I
point.
understand that.
Because they wouldn't necessarily have had that meeting.
Okay. I was just under the impression they didn't meet with them.
I think-
One-on-one.
Oh, they do, but it's
At various times, because it may not all happen over the summer or right when school starts.
Okay. Thank you.
Good information, thank you all. But, I think the story here is that, like you pointed out, there's several areas to be excited about, and I think we've made some good strides over the last couple of years. There's always opportunities to get better. We recognize that you all have a plan, so we're excited about that moving forward and looking forward to hearing more. Thank you all very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, ladies.
Good information. I think it also speaks well that you had a 75% response rate and folks took the time to give you some honest feedback. You're not going to take the time to respond to it if you don't think folks will take it under advisement and do something with it. So I think that's a good indicator too.
Very probably threatened to send Brenda after him.
That's right. We didn't have to.
You don't want to mess with Brenda Hatfield.
We didn't have to give any free NASCAR tickets or anything, or anything else that they might want to get.
Good, good. So moving on to item 10, future dates there. You can see moving into the busier time of the holiday season. Make sure that you've got those dates on your calendar. Christmas break coming up, Temple Caroling, always a good time. Coffee with Larry coming up. And regular board meetings, and then of course the board retreat later on in January. Moving on to old business, one item under there, second read of the 2019-2020 calendar for Mr. Hoffman.
So we first read the calendar last month. We opened up, Ryan had a page on our website to receive feedback. We received very little feedback. And there was one item that I believe we had 7 responses negative on the calendar, and we knew that would be the case, and it has to do with moving the staff compensation days to here, just having parent-teacher conferences in the evenings in the fall, and then not having a day off, having that staff compensation day here. There were 7 responses negative about that. I reached out to both the NEA president and the MSTA president, and they said those were the only things they had. I asked one of them on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not a big deal, 10 being disastrous, how big of an issue is it? And they said it was a 2. They're concerned that they heard over and over that this was going to become a permanent thing, that we were always going to do that. And I reassured them that was not the case. This is a one-time deal due to construction. So we had a couple thoughts. Normally we first read and then approve at the second reading. We haven't had a lot of feedback, so it wouldn't hurt a lot if we kept it open for another month, or I would be open to approving it tonight, whatever you guys thought.
Jason, do you have any thoughts on why you haven't had a ton of feedback on
I don't. It's been in, Ryan, I think, has done a good job of advertising a lot, that give feedback, give feedback, give feedback. I've reached out to both the associations to get their members to submit feedback. I think so as we've been going out rounding, Brenda had a good idea that this should be a question. What do you think of the calendar? And I know Brenda did that and got a lot of positive feedback. And then last week I went to my 2 buildings and did the same thing. And they love, and then that's the other thing, is that we don't have a lot of good solutions. They really like having the 2 weeks at Christmas. They like having spring break. They like having 3 weeks at Thanksgiving. 3 days, not 3 weeks.
Yeah, that really gets some positive.
I'd like to have 3 days.
That's your schedule.
Yeah.
Florida
That would
boy.
improve your survey results.
So
Now we know why
there aren't
Jason's always
many.
tan in December.
No good solutions.
So
to
the
it.
feedback from staff seemed to be fairly positive.
And like someone said earlier, I think it was in the letter that Scott was reading, that people point out things they don't like often, but when people like it, they rarely reach out. And we had some people put feedback in that they love it. And people like starting later. They like having that time off. So
We didn't get feedback from 751 teachers, but if we had 751 teachers and we had 7 negatives, that's pretty positive. Now, that's not to say that there's not more that they didn't take the time, but I know our faculty council, that I meet a rep from each building once a month, and we discussed that last week, and that was the discussion of, and we understand that the day, and we're looking at on, well, would you rather have it on January 2nd, I believe, or January 3rd? Well, I'm not sure about that. Well, it limits our options with having a spring break, with having the Christmas break, with having school completed by Memorial Day, and starting on the 27th. It narrows our options.
we've talked about trying to come up with a poll, but you can't just say, what do you think about not having a day here? Because it's going to be, yeah, I don't like it. It has to be, which is better, this or this, and how to do that and get effective feedback. We haven't had a good solution to.
And why did we move them out? I can't remind me.
Well, just because if we moved this day here, we're trying to maximize the number
Which
of
day are you
student
referencing?
days. One of these staff compensation
Yeah, so
days.
if we-
So if we move that
if we look
here,
at
this is
October-
now a day that is not a student
The 11th.
instruction day, just picking that day. That's now a day that wouldn't be instruction. And so you would either have to make this a day of, one of these a day of instruction, which we don't think will get good student attendance.
One day a week.
You wouldn't expect so?
Yeah, 'cause right now it's coming back on Thursday and Friday.
So we're already going fewer school days next year with this calendar. So you could put another day in there, and that would be just one more day of less instruction that we're doing.
I mean, that was the only feedback I got about the calendar was from teachers removing that compensation day. And I get it. I mean, you're working a regular school day and then you're working an extra 4 hours in the evening, which
12
probably
hour
means,
days.
5 because you're there a little bit later. I mean, that's a lot. And then it almost kind of feels like they just lost that compensation day even though they're getting it later.
Right. And that's the feedback I got from.
But it's
several
just
people.
1 year and it's due to the construction and.
One of the ideas
I know
that
we worked this calendar around
Yeah.
multiple times to try to find a better solution and we felt like this was the best one.
one of the ideas that came up at faculty council was not having both the parent-teacher conference nights in the same week, spread it over a week. So when I was rounding, I asked teachers, and I got a mixed bag. A couple of them said, I just want to knock it out and get it over with. And it's better when, someone's parents don't show up one night to remind the student, hey, didn't see mom or dad last night, they can come tonight. Or if it's spread over 2 weeks, but then the others were like, oh, that's a good idea. So
I just
Yeah.
think we need to remember that when we're talking about the calendar the next time that doesn't happen again.
sure,
Some of
agreed.
it we need to decompress.
I mean, does it hurt to leave it open
Two
till
12 hour
next
days
week?
with meeting with kids.
Not really. I mean,
There's
And we're not gonna change
no harm in waiting another month to see if we get any additional feedback.
Agreed.
I
Philip
don't.
can put it in the newspaper.
But are we gonna make a change?
That would be my question,
I was
gonna say,
is what additional, outside of just leaving it open longer, what additional steps can you all
Do we
take?
expect them
To raise it, raise it up in terms of, folks being aware of it and saying, oh yeah, I guess I need to give them some thoughts on this.
You didn't get any feedback on the shorter window of getting in and getting started
No.
in their classrooms at the beginning of the year? Not really.
I mean, I'm not opposed to doing it, I'm just asking.
You know, we asked
What
last
can we do to
week-
get more feedback? So.
We asked faculty council members to go back to your building and encourage them, if they have thoughts on this, we need to hear from them right away. And
And Jason, I had 2 and I sent them to you.
oh, those were the 2 intentional.
So typically, after second read, we're talking about ratifying policy, and in this case, you'd be talking about adopting a calendar, but, so, you're asking for action one way or the other, right? Either leave it open, hold it over till next month, right? Postpone it until the December board meeting. Bearing in mind, we've got Thanksgiving coming up too, so you got a little bit of a window there where folks are probably gonna be checking things like they typically do. Or I'd entertain a motion for someone to make, to adopt the calendar as proposed.
I would like additional feedback, personally.
I don't see any downside to doing that.
We'll just wait another month.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll hold it open until
Perfect.
December.
Great.
Very good.
Thanks,
Sounds
Jason.
good. Thank you,
Appreciate
Jason.
it. Good work on that. Anytime you start working on calendars, it's a lot different moving parts there for sure. Moving on to new business mentoring update from Mrs. Lee Kershaw, the program director, and Mr. Kirk Schreiber, with Big Brothers Big Sisters of Jefferson City. Happy to have you all here this
I've also
evening.
asked Steve Nelson, actually, is a new employee within our office in the last month or 2. I've asked him to join us too tonight, so.
Steve, you want to come on up?
But Kirk and I are both going to speak.
Awesome, welcome.
Thank you for having us. I really appreciate the opportunity to come back and talk to you again and give you an update on what's going on with mentoring within our office and the Jefferson City Public Schools. In the past year, we've spent a great deal of time ensuring accountability among mentors. As you remember, we merged the JC Champions program with our program, and we found out that unfortunately there were a significant number of mentors that were not meeting with the child consistently, and maybe there was not a quality visit going on. So that was a huge goal of ours, that when we addressed this and closed matches that were truly not active, and worked to find new mentors for these children. In the months prior to school starting, staff worked to confirm with volunteers their desire to return as mentors the following year. We verified attendance of students within the district and began the task of finalizing best mentoring times for the child and a mentor to meet. We also spent time interviewing a new potential mentors to be matched when school begins. The first transition, the first month or so of school is a challenging time, just reconnecting everyone. Unfortunately, as is the case each year, some matches must be closed due to a child moving, a volunteer's loss of interest, or incompatibility within the match. Our goal is to ensure that by the start of the school year, the volunteer knows when and where to meet a child, who the teacher is, and is aware of the sign-in procedures. For volunteers who are seeing children for the first time at the middle school or high school, we schedule a personal visit with them to demonstrate that sign-in procedure and show the volunteer appropriate mentoring locations within the schools. We want to make sure that everyone kicks off the school year in a really positive way, and the volunteer knows what the expectation is. At this time, we have 100 active, stable matches in the school-based mentoring program, and we are supporting 50 in their community program who are Jefferson City School students. There are 14 volunteers that are in process ready to be matched and will be within the next probably month to month and a half. And our waiting list of children screened, accepted, and enrolled in the Big Brothers Big Sisters program through the Jefferson City School District stands at 22 children. Mentors within the Jefferson City Public School Districts are invited and attend our annual picnic held in July, our hayride held last month. We really try to encourage school-based mentors to attend activities that are outside of the school setting. It's a great opportunity for the mentors to meet the families, to have some one-on-one interaction, in a fun environment. Not that school's not fun, but just a little bit more of that personal touch. And our staff supervises those activities. In addition to the quarterly activities for our families, we realize the importance of trained, knowledgeable volunteers. In an effort to ensure that volunteers are aware of issues that affect children, we schedule quarterly training sessions. All school-based mentors are encouraged and invited to attend. The topics covered in this past year included drugs use in teens, child sexual abuse prevention training, childhood trauma, and scheduled for later this week is a presentation by Jim Marshall on drug abuse, anxiety, and coping mechanisms. volunteer recruitment continues to be a priority for our agency. Along with the support of Ken Adamson, our advisory committee member and commercial loan officer of Central Bank, we strategically reached out to 4 local churches to recruit mentors for specific elementary schools. Volunteer recruitment meetings and presentations were held at Capitol West, Concord Baptist, Capital City Christian Church, and Union Hill Baptist Church. Additionally, we spoke at the opening meeting of the retired teachers in September, and whatever civic groups would allow us to come speak to spread the word and the need for mentoring. And we specifically just chose those 4 schools the 4 churches to begin with, realizing that we had a waiting list at those schools, and we wanted to try to reach out to that community that was close in proximity. We are grateful to the family of Jeremy Jones, who made it possible for children within the Big Brothers Big Sisters program to receive assistance when enrolling in sports or fine arts programs. This fund has made it possible for Jefferson City Public School students in our school-based mentoring program to attend soccer camp, take horseback riding lessons, participate on a traveling volleyball league, and enroll in gymnastics at no charge to them. Additionally, because of the Jeremy Jones Scholarship Fund, we granted 3 college scholarships in the amount of $2,500 to 3 Jefferson City High School seniors who were, as we call them, littles, in our program to attend college. Our goal for mentoring is to help our littles reach their greatest possible potential. And thanks to the support of the Jefferson City Public School District, this is possible. We want to thank you again for your partnership and support. We are committed to trying to make sure that we can match every child who needs a mentor with a volunteer. And I'm going to introduce Kirk. Kirk actually is the coordinator for our elementary schools. Steve Nelson, as I mentioned, is sitting there back there in the red shirt. He joined us in September, and he is responsible for the coordination of the secondary schools. We'll turn it over to Kirk to give you some firsthand looks at what mentoring looks like and just for him to share his impact with you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for just allowing me a few minutes tonight to speak. To me, the real impact of school mentoring is embodied in the personal day-to-day stories that each child has and that each mentor has. And the best part of my job is getting to go out in the field and hear those stories. So here's just a few in the last few weeks. A 5th grader showing interest in music as a direct result of her mentor, who's a college professor and a piano teacher, actually bringing her ukulele to school for the child to play. The little is now playing violin in orchestra and has expressed a desire to me, not that I'm going to give her piano lessons, but she would like to take piano lessons. So I've passed that on to her mentor as well. We have a budding 4th grade artist who likes to draw animation and create stories around his characters as a result of his mentor encouraging his creativity and talent by bringing a blank sketch pad to their visits. A Mizzou student, not even from this state, who volunteers his time weekly to travel to Jeff City to visit his 3rd grade little, who according to the school counselor just needs a break from all of his troubles. A mentor who is a retired engineer who mentors his little once a week and spends some additional time with him tutoring in addition to the mentoring session. And one of our longtime mentors who just shared with me how far her 5th grader has grown socially and academically and grown in confidence since she started working with her as a kindergartner. When the mentor first met her, she wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. She said her head would bend down and she would speak ever so meekly. The child is now one of the strongest students in her grade, is very social, and is one of the positive leaders in her 5th grade class. So as I go out into the field, you can just imagine there are countless more stories, examples of our mentors that are truly making an impact, truly making a difference. Our mentors promote healthy and positive relationships which build the child's capacity to develop other healthy relationships with peers and adults. Our mentors incorporate activities which promote literacy and other academic areas with the goal to improve reading, strengthen other basic skills, and instill an overall just desire to learn and to make learning fun. They build self-esteem, increase confidence, improve listening skills, appropriate social interaction. They also assist their kids with managing conflict appropriately, developing problem-solving skills, and just helping them to not feel isolated and alone. So then there's the 4th grade student, little 4th grade girl that I met last year. She's bounced around towns and schools early on in her life. And she told her mentor after seeing her for the first time this school year, quote, "You know those videos that show military dads coming back and surprising their kids at school? That's how I felt when I saw you." As a 3rd grade boy so eloquently stated to me when asked what he would do if he had a mentor, he thought for a second and he said, "Well, the possibilities are endless. So yes, the possibilities are indeed endless, and that's really thanks to the support of all of you on the board, and really thanks to the teachers and the counselors and the principals in each school. They are just so wonderful to connect me to be able to send permission slips home of kids that they think would benefit from the program, and just to support the mentors as well. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Questions for Lee?
I've got tears in my eyes. So,
I just
thanks,
want to thank
Kurt.
you again, though. We
Appreciate that.
really are so grateful for this partnership.
We thank you all.
Yeah,
I-
thank you.
just
Thank you.
Thank you.
Touching one child, helping one child,
Great
it's
stuff.
all
Thanks.
worth it.
Great stuff.
Yeah, good report, good information, glad to have that partnership for sure. Moving on, consider and approve seal of biliteracy resolution. Mr. Verslois.
It's a big word.
But Mr. Verslois?
He's a big boy.
The seal of biliteracy is probably the most simplistic way to put it, is a resume builder that says you are more marketable in a global economy / marketplace. And it's just as it sounds, that you have mastered 2 world languages. So for example, it can be for the most part, one of our kids learning Spanish or Chinese and passing an improved assessment that says you're fluent enough in that to receive the seal of biliteracy. The opposite of that holds true as well. It can be some of our ELL students who master the English language. And so on their transcripts, they would have that mark that they pass, or that they receive the seal of biliteracy. Just a few bulleted items here. It encourages the study of a second language. It will recognize, promote, and praise students for their accomplishment, value diversity, provide employers with a means of identifying bilingual employees, provide universities with a method to recognize and give credit to applicants, prepare students with 21st century skills that will benefit them in a global economy and society, and strengthen relationships and honor the cultures and languages in a community. So that's the seal of biliteracy.
So is this a seal that would go on their transcript? Is that the way, or
Yes,
on their diploma, or at graduation? Or?
I don't know exactly what it would look like on our students' transcript, Ken, but that's exactly what it'd be. It's kind of like right now every school district has a spot, are they A+ eligible with a stamp, as far as identifying what that seal looks like, but it would be on their transcript to where they send it to future employers or colleges for admissions. It would be on their transcript.
Okay. So it would also be Dawn, would it also be part of their student record? I mean,
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's a place for that to be captured and
Right.
included in their
Yes.
record. Okay.
Are you looking for approval?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second. Go ahead.
Got it, Steph? Okay. All in favor of approving the seal of biliteracy as proposed, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Very good. Seal's approved. Thank you, sir. We'll consider confirm filing dates for Board of Education candidates. Jason, what are you doing, man? You're giving me an answer here.
Easy.
We do have, it's that time of year, the dates as far as filing for, we have 2 positions that are 3-term year each.
3-year, yeah.
3-year terms, and that opens on December 11th here of 2018 next month, and is open through January 15th. So just want to let you know on those, the dates for those 2 positions. 2 of our current board members, Rich Abishan and Lorelei Swartz, we want to thank them for their service. They have been serving, and whether they choose to move forward with being considered for future, that's up to them. We want to thank them for their service to the Board of Education this time. So this is just for your information on these dates.
Thank you, Larry. And this is customary. Usually this is the meeting where the board chair asks if anyone's got news to share in terms of an upcoming election. So happy to give you the floor if either one of you all have some thoughts to share.
I would like to express my intention to run for a second term. So I plan to file in December to run for another 3-year term.
I will not. I appreciate the time and the focus that I've been able to have for the board, and hopefully someone else will have the same.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Lorelei. Okay. Guaranteed maximum price number 7. There you go.
We should tell him no.
Okay, so this has been a long process. This is our 7th and final guaranteed maximum price. With the approval of this locks in the maximum cost of the construction of our buildings. The total of the construction agreement with Nabholz is just over $123.5 million. What we're actually approving in this amendment is what's listed in Exhibit B. If you remember, in GMP 6, we rejected bids for structural steel and storefront glass and glazing. We only had one bid on each of those. The bids did come back better with the steel. On the first bid, in order to bid, you had to both supply and erect the steel. When we had the second bid, you could supply both. You could both supply and erect, or you could just be the supplier or the erector. And so it worked out better to get the steel is coming from Jacksonville Steel, and the erector is A&H Erectors. You can see the costs associated with that. Storefront glazing is with Powell's Glass. And then there were some miscellaneous things that needed to be added in that got brought in down here at the bottom. There were some things left out of the bids around the storm shelter, so there's $150,000 being added. When we rejected the original bids, we had to get some of the structural steel from DeLong's so that they could get started on the Nichols part. So they awarded a little piece of structural steel to DeLong's based on their original bid. We've made the decision to add a shock pad under the turf at both Adkins Stadium and Capital City High School, and this is the newest development in concussion prevention. In talking to DLR and their architect, their engineers, they say that in a few years all new stadiums are going to have this. This is very state of the art, and it's going to be great for our student athletes. Moving some contingency back to the construction manager. If you remember, as bids came in a little bit higher, Nabholz reduced some of their contingencies, so that's moving that back. So then just showing you what, after approval of this, these two numbers at Jefferson City High School and Capital City High School match the number that was in GMP number 7, so that's the total construction cost. We still have $1 million of owner contingency should we have some unforeseen things. If we come along and decide, hey, you can add this now, we have a little bit of contingency left. We know we have architect and engineer costs, we know we have asbestos, we have our OSIP, off-site utilities. We were able, after GMP 6, we had to reduce our furniture, fixtures, and equipment budget to get within budget. After this, we're now able to put that back to where it was. So total budget of $144 million. So we issued $130 million of bonds. We received premium on those bonds. We know we're going to get interest income, and included in this cost is the cost of the city street at Capital City High School. And we're working on agreements with the city and county to be reimbursed $1.5 million for that. So all of that, we should have 144.7, so we're about $500,000 under budget. And so we went construction manager at risk, and had we done traditional design bid build, we would start construction now, because we've designed, we've bid, and now is the time we could go start construction. So obviously that didn't work. The schedule is one of the reasons that drove that delivery method, and it's going very well. We've done a lot of construction. But the other thing is when they get bids from subcontractors, Nabholz does a extensive de-scoping process, and then they look through their bid and they say, well, we need to put some allowances in case they need heating and stuff that's not included in their bid. And so if we'd have done design bid build, all of that would have been wrapped in, and then if they didn't use those allowances, the general contractor would keep that money. So those allowances would all have been built in already. Now, those allowances are built into that GMP, but if those allowances aren't used, we don't spend that money, we get to keep it. So this is worst case scenario, and certainly hope and expect that it'll be even better than that.
Second school in the state that's used CM at risk.
Yes, and
I know risk for us to do as well, but I think it's paid off.
Exactly. Independence was the first, and we're the second. But I really think we've made the right choice. I'm super happy with Navholz, the work they've done, and where we're at today. Really excited. I expect it'll be much better than what we're looking at. Because again, this is worst case scenario on the OSIP also. Worst case on using all of those allowances. A lot of positives hopefully to come.
You need approval on this?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Move to approve.
Second. Thank you, Rich.
Those,
Further discussion?
the contractors that were listed there as far as the primary for steel and window, are they, do we know where they're located? Are they, any of them local or?
I know A&H, Dale is here, Harrisburg, and Jacksonville is not. Jacksonville, Arkansas. Okay.
The first bid we got was
Way high.
extremely high.
Right. I knew that they.
Incorrectly spelled, they're PALS. They're just a short way.
Okay. I was
Did you
just
say
curious.
Kansas?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
not local.
I don't like that.
Kansas is by no means local.
You hit me a little bit right there.
Right. Additional questions? Feedback? All in favor of approving GMP number 7, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Say nay. Very good. GMP number 7 and the last GMP, right, Jason?
Correct.
Is approved. Congratulations, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, good deal. Moving on to budget amendment number 1 for 18-19, sorry.
So we usually do 4 budget amendments in the year. This is our first one of the year. We do budget amendments for a number of reasons. The most importantly is we know more today than we knew in June when we wrote the budget. When we wrote the budget, we didn't know the assessed valuation. We hadn't set our tax rate. We've now run payroll, so we made estimates on what we thought payroll was going to be. But we've run the September and the October payroll, so you can forecast out using that data. So we know a lot more today than we did in June. So just getting everybody, this one's really just ensuring that what we thought back in June was right, and if it's not right, what changes do we need to make? So the important thing, we originally we're expecting a $1.5 million surplus this year and would go to almost 26% fund balances. So the second page shows the second page shows the changes that are being recommended. County stock insurance is the strange revenue that we get. It's hard to predict, but the good thing is it comes at the end of August, so that is the actual county stock insurance. It was $100,000 less than what we had budgeted, but still $2.9 million. Local and delinquent taxes or assessed valuation grew more than we expected, and in looking at our collection rate, we maybe used a little bit lower collection rate, and we'll find out in January if we're actually going to collect at a higher rate. So increasing the expected budget by $400,000 there. Interest income, interest rates are continuing to go up, so increasing that by $100,000. We are changing how we are budgeting for activities. I've never liked how we've done it, and so since Aaron's been on, we've been talking about this, and he's agreed to make a big change. So we're moving, we have Fund 61, that's our activity account, and in the past it's kind of been crazy. We're now moving all of the actual district supported activities out of Fund 61 and into a budget. So that's just moving that $368,000 from Fund 61 to our district operating funds. And then really the only change on the expenditure side is in looking at what we've actually done on salaries. We're expecting salaries to come in about $200,000 less than we originally budgeted. And all of these changes is just moving this $368,000 of expenses from that same Fund 61 up into the operating funds. So it's a net increase in our operating fund balance of almost $600,000. Then we keep debt service separately. So county stock insurance, that's a final number. The debt service came in $129,000 less, but again, assessed valuation grew, so increasing expected revenues in the debt service fund by $150,000, so a net change in the debt service fund of positive $21,000. So what that does to we're now expecting $2.1 million surplus, almost 26.3. So remember, we had to increase our tax rate this year because we couldn't do it next year when we really need it. So our tax rate's going to stay the same, but now next year we're going to add staff to operate the second high school. So we expected to run a huge surplus this year, knowing we're going to run a deficit next year. So then as everything repeats itself, we have to make sure everything we're doing we can sustain. So just using assumptions going forward, we're take that $2.1 million, expecting to run a small deficit next year, and then in 2020-21, we would then take the final 10 cents of our operating levy in 2021, so that's what bumps it back up. But basically running balanced budgets out here, and our fund balance is actually higher than what we need. We have 20%, so we'll continue to work at that, but we're in definitely a great spot.
Questions?
Move to approve.
Way to go.
Second. Thank you, Ken. Any further discussion? All right. All in favor of budget amendment number 1, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Very good. Budget amendment's passed.
Good job.
Just a quick note that I was at a conference over the weekend, and I'll tell you, it's been consistent for the past 5 years that I've been on the board. And those of you all that work with Denise and Jason and everyone in their office, when you go to these meetings and you go talk to other districts and other educators around the state, and you tell them, hey, I'm from Jefferson City and I work with Jason or I work with Denise, there's ready recognition that we're one of the best managed school districts in the state of Missouri. They know the quality that we have out of our financial folks. So just a kudos to you guys. This is not easy work to do, and it's always a source of pride for me to go to those type of locations, those meetings, those annual meetings like you or I were at last month, and you hear those folks say, oh man, any way that you could get him to come, and hands off. So pleased that you're working for us. Thank you. Okay. Next item is a motion to suspend open and enter into closed session. Lori, Loreline, either of you want to take that up?
It's yours, girl.
Motion to suspend open to enter into closed meeting by roll call vote pursuant to Chapter 6.021 of the Revised Statutes of Missouri, Sections 1, legal actions, causes of action, or litigation involving a public governmental body. 3, hiring, firing, disciplining, or promoting of particular employees. 13, individually identifiable personnel records. And 14, records which are protected from disclosure by law.
Action by roll call vote. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Rich. Stephanie, when you're ready.
Lindsay, yes. Roy?
Yes.
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
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 Scott, thank you.
Very good.